Hi guys and welcome to TechteamGB. This is Tech FAQs, a series where I take a look at some of your frequently asked questions and give you both my thoughts and, well, your thoughts as well. I ask you on Twitter if you want to reply to the question I'll be answering in these videos, so feel free to make sure you're following me on Twitter if you want to be included in these videos. Let's start off with the first episode. So this week's question is, should you get an 8700K or an 1800X? Now this is a pretty vague question, especially because I get this asked a lot in a lot of different varying ways, from whether it's just specifically for gaming, whether it's in general, or if you do productivity work and all that sort of stuff. So I want to give a sort of broad answer to which one I would personally pick, and of course give you a rundown of which one kind of excels in which area, and your thoughts as well. The 8700K is going to be a much better chip for gaming in general, especially at 1080p. If you're gaming at 1440p or 4K, it matters a lot less which chip you go with, and it really will then come down to pricing and other variables that you may want to factor in when looking at picking up these chips. If you are planning on doing productivity work, for example, then it depends which work you're doing, but on the whole, the Ryzen chip is going to do a little bit better because of those extra cores while still maintaining a pretty decent clock speed. When it comes to things like gaming and streaming on the same machine using the X264 encoder, I've done quite a few videos on this, so feel free to take a look at those specifically, but on the whole, you will see likely better FPS with the 8700K, especially at 1080p, but when it comes to the difference and a lot of the time just the general playability, the Ryzen chip tends to win out there. Now I'm not going to talk about value for money because that changes drastically depending on what deals are on, what country you're in, and when you watch this, but feel free to take a look at the link in the description down below to each of these chips, which will give you an idea of pricing when and where you watch this. But from my current experience, the 1800X and the actual subset to that, the 1700X, especially if you overclock it, are fantastic value for money, whereas the 8700K, unless you're specifically gaming, you likely won't see as much of effectively a return on investment, if you like, but that's my personal preference. So to straight up answer the question, should you get an 8700K or an 1800X? As always with a lot of these, it does kind of depend. As I said, if you're gaming, go for the 8700K, you'll have a better experience, you'll have better FPS, and while it will run very hot and draw a fair bit of power, it will be a very impressive gaming experience. If you want better upgradability and sort of future-proofness effectively of the chip and your system as a whole, go with the AMD chip, as the motherboards will be supported until I think at least 2020, AMD said, so that's awesome to see, and obviously with BIOS updates we'll keep seeing those boards being more and more useful in the future with more and more chips added to the compatibility list, so that's also really nice to see. Now here's the part where I get to include your answers. I asked you on Twitter what you thought and which one you would go with, and here's some of the options available. So first of all, Elliot Street on Twitter said that after the Spectre fiasco and Intel's handling of it, he would vote AMD massively here. This is certainly an interesting thing, as the Spectre and Meltdown issues were a pretty big deal, and especially considering that the Intel patches for them, despite them knowing for a good 6 months that this was a vulnerability, they seem to not have done any work in that 6 months, so that's a very valid point. Christopher Perkins says he has a 1700 himself and he's overclocked it and he's very happy with it, although if you were exclusively going for gaming, he would recommend the 8700K, and that's something I personally second. Matty Hodgson said that if the bulk of your workload is gaming, then the 8700K is the one to go for. He says that it's easier to overclock the 8700K and therefore you get some free performance down the line, which is always nice to see. Now my main thought on this one just is that my experience with the A700K and the 1800X is that the 1800X is a fair bit easier to overclock, at least in my experience. Of course it doesn't go as high, obviously the A700K is a ridiculously high overclocker, especially if you delid it, but you generally have to delid it to get anywhere near the actual like silicon's ability to overclock, so that's just something to bear in mind with overclocking either of those chips. NiceX said that he would go with the 1800X as that has a longer support life. Obviously the AM4 motherboards are, as I said, going to be supported for the next couple of generations of Ryzen chips, so that's really nice to see and something that a lot of people will value when thinking about buying a motherboard and a platform that will end up lasting for 5+ years rather than the single year that the Intel chip and Intel platform generally tends to last for these days. Neil McCallum is a bit of an AMD fanboy, so he's on the AMD train here too. He has a 1600X himself but would love to get his hands on an 1800X, and I think this is kind of just another vote in the AMD camp. Mike Hayward says still Intel, as AMD just can't match Intel's IPC, and especially if money isn't the main factor here, then that's where he would go. That's a fair enough kind of point, especially because of the massive clock speed difference that you do have, even with the maximum overclock of an 1800X, which I've personally found to be about 4.1, 4.2 gigahertz, versus especially a de-lidded 8700K with a maximum of 5 to 5.1 gigahertz, which is pretty impressive. Moses says the 8700 or the 8400, which is the cheaper i5 alternative, still 6 cores but only 6 threads as opposed to 12 threads with 8700K and a lower clock speed too. He also suggests the 8600 when it's available. Cybershark is voting for the 1800X, although it doesn't have anything against the 8700K. And Ish is voting for the 8700K, especially if it's a good overclocker. So that kind of rounds out the viewer submissions or viewer answers. Obviously you can see a pretty balanced field and some really interesting points, especially from the area of overclocking to the area of the Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities, and obviously platform support and stuff like that as well. So awesome, thank you for submitting your answers, and feel free to check me out on Twitter at TechteamGB if you want to be part of the next video. So that pretty much wraps it up for this video. This has been the first episode of Tech FAQs. This is something that I'm going to be developing over time, and it's going to be hopefully every Saturday from now on, so that should be really cool to see. If you have any suggestions for things that I should improve in this series, let me know in the comments down below. If you want to be part of the next video answering the question, as I said, check me out on Twitter at TechteamGB, and otherwise that is pretty much it. If you want to support these videos on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and now Saturday basis, take a look at the links in the description down below. There's plenty of you to check out, and of course there will be plenty of videos throughout the week on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, as well as obviously the next episode of Tech FAQs next Saturday. So yeah, thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you all in the next video.